The bullet grazed Quinn Tate's shoulder as he dove behind the water trough, his blood seeping into the dry New Mexico dust, while townspeople scattered like tumbleweeds in a storm. It was June 1878, and Raton, New Mexico had become a place where justice wore a crooked badge and survival meant keeping your head down. Quinn pressed his hand against the wound, gritting his teeth as he watched Marshal Davies and his deputies ride past, their laughter echoing off the false-fronted buildings lining the main street. They had shot him over unpaid taxes that had tripled since Davies took office 6 months ago. Taxes designed to drive small ranchers like Quinn off their land so the railroad men could sweep in and claim it for pennies. He waited until the hoofbeats faded before stumbling to his feet. The town doctor would not help him, not against the marshal's wishes. Quinn knew he had one choice: get back to his ranch 5 miles outside town and hope the wound was not as bad as the burning sensation suggested. The ride home felt like crawling through broken glass. Every movement of his horse sent lightning through his shoulder, and by the time his small ranch house came into view, Quinn could barely stay in the saddle. He slid off his horse and collapsed near the porch, consciousness slipping away like water through his fingers. When he opened his eyes, darkness had fallen and someone was touching his shoulder with surprisingly gentle hands. Quinn jerked away instinctively, then groaned at the pain the movement caused. "Stay still, you fool," a woman's voice said, low and firm. "The bullet went through clean, but you are losing blood." Quinn tried to focus on the face above him. In the lamplight from his open door, he could make out sharp features, dark eyes that seemed to reflect the flame, and black hair pulled back in a severe braid. The woman wore men's clothes, dusty and worn, and her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she cleaned his wound. "Who are you?" Quinn managed to ask through gritted teeth. "Someone who knows what it is like to be shot at by Davies and his men," she replied, her voice carrying a bitterness that matched his own. She did not look up from her work. "My name is Grace Ashford." Quinn's eyes widened despite the pain. Everyone in the territory knew that name, though few had seen the woman who bore it. Grace Ashford, the witch of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, they called her. The woman who could supposedly kill a man with a glance, who had murdered her own father, who consorted with demons in the dark of night. Children were told her name to scare them into obedience. "I know what they say about me," Grace said, as if reading his thoughts. She finally looked at him, and Quinn saw no malice in those dark eyes, only a bone-deep weariness. "None of it is true. Well, most of it is not true. I did shoot my father, but he was trying to beat my mother to death at the time. That was 5 years ago. I was 18. He survived, unfortunately, and told everyone I was possessed by devils. When my mother died 3 months later, he claimed I had cursed her. The town believed him." She finished wrapping his shoulder with strips of cloth torn from what looked like her own shirt. "I have been living in the mountains since then, hunting, trapping, staying out of everyone's way. But I saw what happened in town today. Davies is getting bolder." Quinn struggled to sit up, and this time Grace helped him, her arm supporting his back with surprising strength. "Why help me?" "Because I am tired of running," Grace said simply. "And because I saw you stand up to Davies last month at the town meeting. You are one of the few who did." She stood, brushing dust from her pants. "I will stay tonight to make sure infection does not set in. After that, I will be gone." But Grace did not leave the next morning or the morning after that. Quinn's fever spiked on the second day, and Grace stayed, bathing his forehead with cool water drawn from the well, forcing him to drink willow bark tea that tasted like punishment but kept the worst of the pain at bay. In his delirium, Quinn mumbled about his ranch, about how his parents had died within months of each other 2 years ago, leaving him alone on land that demanded more work than one man could give. When the fever broke on the fourth day, Quinn woke to find Grace cooking breakfast over his stove, the smell of frying bacon and fresh coffee filling the small house. It was the first real meal anyone had cooked in this kitchen since his mother died. "You stayed," Quinn said, his voice rough from disuse. Grace turned, spatula in hand, and he noticed for the first time how young she was, probably only 23 or 24. The hard life in the mountains had carved lines of experience into her face, but her eyes held a vulnerability that the rumors never mentioned. "Your fever was bad," she said, as if that explained everything. She brought him a plate heaping with food. "Eat. You need your strength back." They ate in silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that settles between people who have shared something fundamental. When Quinn finished, he set down his fork and looked at Grace directly. "How long has it been since you had a real roof over your head?" Grace stiffened. "I manage fine in the mountains." "That is not what I asked." She was quiet for a long moment. "5 years, since the night I shot my father and ran." Quinn nodded slowly, an idea forming in his mind. It was crazy, desperate, and exactly the kind of plan a man with nothing left to lose might consider. "I have a proposition for you." Grace raised an eyebrow. "I am not that kind of woman." "Not that," Quinn said quickly, feeling heat rise to his face despite the lingering weakness from his wound. "A marriage. A real one, legally binding. I need help running this ranch, and you need protection from whatever your father and this town might do. As my wife, you would have legal standing, property rights. They could not touch you without going through me." "They shot you 4 days ago," Grace pointed out dryly. "They shot at me," Quinn corrected. "And they did not kill me. There is a difference. Davies is corrupt, but he is also a coward. He picks on isolated targets. A married couple, working a legitimate ranch, that is harder to justify attacking, especially if we make sure witnesses are around whenever we go to town." Grace stood and walked to the window, looking out at the ranch land that stretched toward the mountains. Quinn could see her mind working, weighing options, calculating risks. He knew he was asking something enormous, but he also knew they both needed this. "Why would you do this?" Grace asked without turning around. "Marrying me makes you an outcast too. The town already fears me. Associating with me will not win you any friends." "I do not have any friends in town worth keeping," Quinn said. "And I will not survive another winter alone trying to do the work of 3 men by myself. This ranch is dying, Grace. I am dying. Maybe we can save each other." She turned then, and Quinn saw something shift in her expression, a crack in the armor she wore. "What if the things they say about me are true? Are they? Would you believe me if I said no?" "I would believe what I have seen with my own eyes," Quinn said. "I have seen a woman who stopped to help a stranger bleeding in the dirt. I have seen someone who nursed a fever through the night when she could have taken what she wanted and left. That tells me more about who you are than any town gossip." Grace crossed her arms, but Quinn could see she was considering it. "I do not love you. I do not even know you." "I am not asking you to love me," Quinn said, though something in his chest tightened at the words. "I am asking you to survive with me. The rest we can figure out as we go." 3 days later, they rode into Raton together. Grace wearing the only dress she owned, a simple blue cotton thing she had salvaged from her old life. Quinn had his arm in a sling, but he sat straight in his saddle, and Grace rode beside him with her head high despite the stares that followed them down the main street. The justice of the peace, a nervous man named Horace Pemberton, tried to refuse them at first. "Miss Ashford, I do not think this is wise. The marshal has made it clear that you are not welcome in town." "The marshal does not have jurisdiction over legal marriages," Quinn said firmly. unless the law has changed recently. I would hate to have to write to the territorial governor about judicial irregularities in Raton. Pemberton paled at the mention of the governor. For all his corruption, Marshal Davies had been careful to keep his abuses below the notice of Santa Fe. A formal complaint might bring federal marshals, and that would end Davies's little empire. Of course, Pemberton stammered. I will prepare the documents immediately. The ceremony took less than 10 minutes. Pemberton rushed through the words while glancing nervously at the door, as if expecting Davies to burst in at any moment. When he pronounced them married, Quinn turned to Grace, and they shared a look of mutual acknowledgement. This was not love, not yet, but it was partnership, and in the harsh reality of 1878 New Mexico, that counted for something. They bought supplies with what little money Quinn had left, Grace choosing practically while ignoring the whispers that followed her through the general store. Mrs. Henderson, who ran the store with her husband, refused to serve them until Grace placed a $20 gold piece on the counter, more than enough to cover everything they needed. Hard currency spoke louder than prejudice, apparently. As they loaded their supplies into the wagon, a group of men emerged from the saloon across the street. Quinn recognized them immediately. Davies's deputies, drunk at 3 in the afternoon and looking for trouble. The marshal himself stood in the saloon doorway, watching with the satisfied expression of a cat with a cornered mouse. Well, look what we got here, the lead deputy, a nasty piece of work named Pike, called out. Quinn Tate Dunn married himself the witch woman. Guess he is more desperate than we thought. Quinn felt Grace tense beside him, but he kept his voice calm. Deputy Pike, Marshal, we are just doing some shopping, causing no trouble. Causing no trouble, Davies stepped into the street, his hand resting casually on his gun belt. Harboring a known criminal is trouble, Tate. Grace Ashford is wanted for assault with intent to kill. That is what her father filed 5 years ago. The warrant is still active. Then you should have arrested me when I was living in the mountains, Grace said, her voice steady despite the danger crackling in the air. You knew where I was. Everyone did. But you never came for me because you knew the warrant was garbage. My father beat my mother near death and I stopped him. Every witness at the trial confirmed it. There was no trial, Davies said, his smile widening. Your father decided not to press charges after you disappeared, but I could reopen the case. Especially now that you are back in civilized society. Quinn stepped forward, placing himself slightly between Grace and the marshal. If you had grounds to arrest her, you would have done it already. You are trying to intimidate us because I spoke against your land grab at the public meeting. This is harassment, pure and simple, and I will document every incident in letters to Santa Fe. For a moment, real anger flashed in Davies's eyes and Quinn wondered if he had pushed too far. Then the marshal laughed, though it held no humor. You write all the letters you want, Tate. Just remember, accidents happen on isolated ranches. Fires start. Cattle stray. Would be a shame if something happened to your new bride. They left town under the hostile stares of half the population, but Quinn noticed something else too, a few sympathetic glances quickly hidden. Not everyone in Raton loved Marshal Davies and his methods. That was worth remembering. The ride back to the ranch was quiet until they were well outside town. Then Grace spoke, her voice tight. I should not have come. I have made things worse for you. You have made things complicated, Quinn corrected. That is different. Davies was already squeezing me. At least now I have someone watching my back. Grace looked at him, really looked at him, and Quinn felt something pass between them, a recognition deeper than words. They were both survivors, both fighters, both alone in a world that had not been kind. The marriage certificate folded in his pocket might be just paper, but the alliance it represented was real. Over the following weeks, they fell into a rhythm. Quinn taught Grace the details of running the ranch, though she picked up most of it with surprising speed. She had learned self-sufficiency in the mountains, and that translated well to ranch work. Grace proved to be an excellent shot with a rifle, better than Quinn, and her knowledge of herbs and natural medicine came in handy when one of the horses developed an infection. But it was the small moments that caught Quinn off guard. The way Grace hummed while cooking breakfast, a soft melody that filled the house with unexpected warmth. The rare smile that crossed her face when they successfully repaired a section of fence that had been falling apart for months. The sight of her standing on the porch at sunset, her hair loose for once, the fading light turning everything golden. They slept in separate rooms, Quinn in his parents' old bedroom, Grace in what had been his sister's room before she married and moved to Colorado. They were careful around each other, polite, maintaining the boundaries of their arrangement. But Quinn found himself noticing things he should not notice. The curve of Grace's neck when she leaned over to examine something, the strength in her hands, the way her eyes softened when she thought no one was watching. One evening, about a month after their marriage, they sat on the porch after a long day of work. The summer heat had finally broken, and a cool breeze drifted down from the mountains. Grace had made stew for dinner, using wild herbs she had gathered, and it was the best meal Quinn had eaten in years. "You asked me once if the things they say about me are true," Grace said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence. "I want to tell you the whole story." Quinn waited, sensing that this was important, that Grace was offering him something precious. "My father was a drunk and a bully," she began, her voice steady but distant, as if recounting someone else's life. "He worked for the railroad when they first came through, made good money, but he gambled most of it away. My mother tried to keep the family together, took in washing and mending, but it was never enough for him. He would come home angry and look for someone to take it out on." Grace pulled her knees up, wrapping her arms around them, making herself smaller. "Usually it was my mother. Sometimes it was me. I learned early how to stay out of his way, how to read his moods, how to disappear when the anger got too big. But that night, 5 years ago, I came home from helping a neighbor with her garden, and I heard my mother screaming. Not the usual sounds, not the muffled crying I had learned to ignore. Real screaming, the kind that means something is terribly wrong." Quinn wanted to reach out to offer comfort, but he sensed that Grace needed to tell this without interruption, without sympathy. "I ran inside, and he had her on the floor, his hands around her throat. Her face was purple. She was dying. I grabbed my father's rifle from above the fireplace and I shot him in the leg." Grace's voice remained flat, factual. "The bullet shattered his kneecap. He will walk with a cane for the rest of his life, but my mother was still breathing, so I would do it again." The neighbors came running when they heard the shot. They saw my mother, saw the bruises, saw my father on the floor. The doctor was called and he treated both of them. At first, people were sympathetic. They knew what kind of man my father was. But then he started talking. Grace's hands tightened around her knees. "He told everyone I was possessed, that I had tried to kill him without provocation, that I had been acting strangely for months. He said my mother's injuries were from me, that he had been trying to protect her when I shot him. And some people believed him. Enough people believed him that when my mother died 3 months later from pneumonia, they whispered that I had cursed her, that I had made a deal with dark forces in exchange for power." "That is insane," Quinn said quietly. "That is fear," Grace corrected. "People need explanations for the terrible things that happen. A daughter shooting her father, even a father like mine, that is frightening. It suggests that the natural order can be broken, that children might rise against parents, that women might use violence against men. Easier to believe I was possessed, that I was something unnatural, than to acknowledge that sometimes good people are driven to desperate acts. "So you ran." "I ran," Grace confirmed. "Because I knew what came next. They would arrest me, put me on trial, and my father would lie under oath. I had no money for a lawyer, no powerful friends. I would have been convicted and hanged. So I took what I could carry and disappeared into the mountains." She turned to look at Quinn directly. "I learned to survive up there. I learned to hunt, to trap, to live with the silence and the cold. I learned that being alone was safer than being around people who wanted to hurt me, and I convinced myself I did not need anything else." "What changed?" Quinn asked. Grace was quiet for a moment. "I saw you in town that day, arguing with Davies at the meeting. You were the only one who stood up to him. Everyone else sat there, scared or complicit, but you spoke up. You said that the law was supposed to protect people, not exploit them. And I thought, maybe there are still good people in the world. Maybe I do not have to spend the rest of my life hiding." Something warm bloomed in Quinn's chest. "I am not that good. I was just angry." "Righteous anger and goodness are not mutually exclusive," Grace said with a hint of a smile, the first real smile Quinn had seen from her. It transformed her face, softening the hard edges that years of survival had carved. "Your father," Quinn said carefully. "Is he still in Rattan?" "He left town about 2 years ago, last I heard. His leg never healed right and he could not work anymore." "Someone said he went to live with his brother in Texas." Grace shrugged. "I do not know if that is true. I do not care as long as he stays away." They sat in silence for a while longer, the crickets singing in the darkness, the stars emerging one by one above the mountains. Quinn felt the weight of what Grace had shared, the trust it represented. This was more than a marriage of convenience now. This was two people seeing each other clearly, scars and all, and choosing to stay. "Thank you for telling me," Quinn said finally. "It does not change anything between us, except maybe to make me glad you are here." Grace looked at him, and in the lamplight from the house, Quinn saw something shift in her expression. "I am glad I am here too," she said softly. "I did not expect that." The summer faded into fall, and their partnership deepened into something neither of them had quite anticipated. They worked side by side, repairing the ranch, restoring what years of neglect and Quinn's single-handed efforts had allowed to deteriorate. Grace suggested improvements that Quinn would never have thought of, clever solutions born from her years of making do with limited resources in the mountains. They expanded the vegetable garden, with Grace planting herbs and medicinal plants alongside the practical crops. She taught Quinn which plants could be used for what ailments, knowledge passed down from her mother, and supplemented by trial and error in the wilderness. Quinn taught Grace the business side of ranching, how to calculate feed costs and plan for seasonal expenses, skills his father had drilled into him. But it was the small intimacies that caught Quinn off guard, the way their hands would brush when passing tools, the sound of Grace's laughter when he told a bad joke, the way she started touching his arm when making a point. They were becoming friends, and underneath that friendship, Quinn felt something else growing, something he was afraid to name. One October morning, Quinn woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. He stumbled out of bed, his heart pounding, and found Grace already on the porch, rifle in hand, staring at the eastern pasture. Flames licked at the dry grass, spreading fast in the morning breeze. "Fire," Grace said tersely. "Started about 10 minutes ago. I already got the horses out of the barn." They spent the next 6 hours fighting the blaze, using wet blankets and shovels full of dirt to create a fire break. By the time they finally got it under control, they were both black with soot and exhausted. 3 acres of pasture had burned, and the fence line was destroyed. This was not natural, Grace said, examining the point where the fire had started. She pointed to scorch marks on a fence post. Someone set this deliberately. There are lamp oil residue here. Quinn's jaw tightened. Davies. It had to be Davies making good on his threat. But proving it was another matter entirely. Over the next few weeks, there were more incidents. Cattle went missing. 3 head that Quinn found 2 days later, shot and left to rot in an arroyo. Someone contaminated their well with a dead coyote, forcing them to spend a full day cleaning it out. Tools disappeared from the barn, and one morning they woke to find threatening words painted on the side of the house. Witch and Devil Woman in crude red letters. Grace scrubbed the paint off with grim determination, but Quinn saw how it affected her, the way her shoulders hunched, the walls going back up. She was retreating into herself, preparing to run again. "They want me gone," Grace said one evening, stating the obvious. "If I leave, the harassment will stop." "No," Quinn said firmly. "If you leave, they win. Davies wins. Every bully in this territory wins. We stick together, we document everything, and we make it too expensive for them to continue." "It might get worse before it gets better," Grace warned. "Then it gets worse," Quinn said. He reached out and took her hand, the first time he had deliberately touched her beyond what work required. Her skin was rough from labor but warm, alive. "I am not letting you face this alone. That is not how marriage works, even marriages like ours." Grace looked down at their joined hands, and when she looked back up, her eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Why do you care so much? We barely know each other. This was supposed to be a practical arrangement." "Because you matter," Quinn said simply. "Because you are brave and kind and stronger than anyone I have ever met. Because when I look at you, I do not see a witch or an outcast. I see Grace." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. But Grace did not pull her hand away, and Quinn counted that as a victory. The harassment continued through November, but Quinn noticed something changing in town. Not everyone approved of what was happening. Mrs. Henderson at the general store started slipping extra supplies into their orders, refusing payment for the additions. A few other ranchers, men who remembered Quinn's father with respect, made a point of tipping their hats to Grace when they saw her, small gestures of acknowledgement that meant more than they knew. The turning point came on a cold December morning when Quinn and Grace rode into town for supplies. They found a crowd gathered in front of the doctor's office, voices raised in anger. As they approached, Quinn saw Marshal Davies trying to evict old Doc Morrison from his building. "You are 3 months behind on rent," Davies was saying, his voice carrying across the street. "That property belongs to the railroad now, and they want paying tenants." "The rent tripled without notice," Doc Morrison protested. He was in his 60s, respected by everyone in town, one of the few medical professionals for 50 miles. "You cannot expect me to pay rates meant for commercial businesses. This is a medical practice. I serve the community." "Then the community can pay your rent," Davies said coldly. He gestured to his deputies. "Get his things out. He has until noon to vacate." The crowd muttered, but no one stepped forward. Quinn saw the same pattern he had witnessed for months: anger without action, disgust without courage. Davies was counting on their fear, their isolation, their unwillingness to stand together. Quinn looked at Grace, and she looked back at him, and he saw his own determination reflected in her eyes. They dismounted together and walked toward the confrontation. "This is illegal seizure," Quinn called out, his voice cutting through the murmurs. "Doc Morrison has rights as a tenant, including proper notice and a chance to contest the rent increase. You cannot just throw him into the street." Davies turned, his expression darkening when he saw who had spoken. "Tate, should have known you would stick your nose where it does not belong." "This does not concern you. It concerns everyone in this town," Grace said, stepping up beside Quinn. "We all need a doctor. If you drive Doc Morrison out, what happens when someone gets sick, when a child needs medical attention? Are we supposed to just die because the railroad wants more money?" Her words struck home. Quinn saw several women in the crowd nodding, their faces troubled. These were practical concerns that cut across social boundaries. Fear of Grace was one thing, but fear of losing their only doctor was something else entirely. "The witch speaks," Davies said mockingly. "Amazing what grows a voice when it is safely married. Tell me, Grace, does your husband know what you really are? Does he know about the curses you laid on people in the mountains, the travelers who disappeared near your camp?" "What travelers?" Grace demanded. "Name one. Give me one verifiable incident of someone I supposedly harmed." Davies opened his mouth, then closed it. He could not name anyone because there was no one. The rumors were just that, rumors, ghost stories with no substance. "You spread fear because it gives you power," Grace continued, her voice rising. "You use people's superstitions to keep them divided and afraid, but I am done being your scapegoat. I am done hiding. My name is Grace Ashford Tate. I am a legal resident of this territory, and I am standing with my neighbors." The use of her married name, Quinn's name, sent a thrill through him. Grace was claiming her place, refusing to be driven away, and her words were having an effect. More people were nodding now, the crowd's mood shifting from passive observation to active consideration. An older woman, someone Quinn vaguely recognized from church, stepped forward. "My name is Alina Watts. I have lived in Raton for 20 years, and I was there the night Grace shot her father. I saw her mother's injuries. I gave testimony about what I witnessed. Grace Ashford is no witch. She is a girl who protected her mother from a violent man. If that makes her evil, then we have lost all sense of right and wrong." Her words broke the dam. Others started speaking up, sharing their own frustrations with Davies, their own experiences of extortion and abuse of power. The marshal's face grew redder, his hand drifting toward his gun, but there were too many witnesses now, too many people watching. "This is not over," Davies snarled at Quinn and Grace. "You two are making enemies you cannot afford." "We are making friends," Quinn corrected. "That is what scares you." Davies and his deputies retreated, but everyone knew this was an escalation, not a resolution. Still, something had shifted. Doc Morrison kept his office. The crowd dispersed with new energy, and several people approached Quinn and Grace afterward to offer quiet thanks. On the ride home, Grace was quiet, processing what had happened. Finally, she spoke. "That woman, Alina Watts. I did not know she had testified on my behalf." "You ran before the situation could be fully investigated," Quinn said. "Fear made you run. I understand that. But maybe if you had stayed, if people had stood together then like they did today, things could have been different." "Maybe," Grace said softly. "Or maybe I would be dead. It is hard to know, but today felt like something changed." "Something did change," Quinn agreed. "People saw us standing together. They saw you as a person, not a story. That matters." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the winter sun low on the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of gold and amber. Quinn found himself acutely aware of Grace beside him, the way she sat her horse with easy confidence, the determined set of her jaw, the hint of hope in her eyes that had not been there before. "Quinn," Grace said suddenly, "thank you. For today, for everything, for not giving up on this on us." "Us," Quinn repeated, testing the word. It sounded right, felt right in a way he had not expected. They were an us now, not just two people sharing space but a unit, a partnership that had grown into something more profound. That night after dinner, they sat by the fire. The temperature had dropped, and snow was threatening in the heavy clouds overhead. Grace had been mending one of Quinn's shirts, her hands moving with practiced efficiency, when she suddenly set down the sewing and looked at him. "I need to tell you something," she said, and there was a vulnerability in her voice that made Quinn's heart quicken. "These past months living here working with you, I have been happy, really happy in a way I thought I would never be again, and it scares me." "Why does it scare you?" Quinn asked, though he thought he knew the answer. "Because happiness can be taken away," Grace said simply. "Because I am starting to feel things I should not feel, want things I have no right to want. We made an agreement, a practical arrangement, and I am breaking the rules." Quinn set down the ranch ledger he had been pretending to review. "What if I am breaking the rules too?" Grace's eyes widened. "What? What if I lie awake at night listening to you move around in the next room and wish there was not a wall between us?" Quinn said, his heart pounding. "What if I look forward to every morning because I get to see you at breakfast? What if I have fallen in love with my own wife, and I do not know how to tell her?" The silence that followed felt eternal. Grace stared at him, her expression unreadable, and Quinn wondered if he had just destroyed everything they had built. Then Grace stood, crossed the small space between them, and kissed him. It was not a gentle kiss, not tentative or questioning. It was fierce and claiming and full of months of suppressed longing. Quinn pulled her onto his lap, his hands tangling in her hair, and Grace made a small sound that went straight through him. They broke apart, breathing hard, and Grace rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she whispered. "I did not want to. I tried not to, but I do. I love your kindness and your stubbornness and the way you see me as a person, not a monster. I love that you fight for what is right even when it costs you. I love you, Quinn Tate, and it terrifies me." "Then we can be terrified together," Quinn said, kissing her again, softer this time but no less intense. "Because I love you too, Grace. So much it hurts." They made love that night in Quinn's bed that became their bed, with the fire dying down and snow beginning to fall outside. It was awkward and sweet and imperfect, two people learning each other for the first time. But it was also right, the physical expression of something that had been growing between them for months. Afterward, lying tangled together under heavy quilts, Grace traced patterns on Quinn's chest. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we face whatever comes together," Quinn said, "as partners, as lovers, as whatever we want to be." "As husband and wife," Grace said, and this time the words carried weight they had not carried before. "Really married." "Really married," Quinn agreed, pulling her closer. Winter settled over the ranch, and with it came a period of relative peace. The incidents of harassment decreased, perhaps because the snow made it harder to cause trouble, or perhaps because the confrontation in town had given Davies pause. Quinn and Grace used the time to fortify their position, literally and figuratively. They repaired the damaged fences, built up their food stores, and made contact with other small ranchers who were also feeling the pressure from Davies and his railroad backers. Quinn wrote letters to the territorial government, documenting the abuses and building a paper trail. Grace used her mountain survival skills to set up early warning systems around the ranch, subtle arrangements of string and bells that would alert them if anyone approached. But mostly, they learned each other. They talked late into the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Quinn learned that Grace had wanted to be a teacher before everything fell apart, that she loved reading and had taught herself advanced mathematics from books her mother had saved. Grace learned that Quinn had briefly considered joining the army before his parents' deaths had called him home, that he played the harmonica badly but enthusiastically, that he had a deep-seated fear of failing the people who depended on him. They made love often, discovering each other's bodies with the delight of new lovers. Grace was bolder than Quinn expected, unashamed of her desires, and it freed something in him. They were healing each other, filling the lonely places with warmth and connection. Christmas came and they celebrated quietly, just the two of them. Quinn gave Grace a new rifle, finely made and perfectly balanced, and her eyes lit up with genuine joy. Grace gave Quinn a leather-bound journal she had somehow acquired and filled the first page with her careful handwriting, for documenting our life together. It was one of the most thoughtful gifts he had ever received. On New Year's Eve, 1879, they stood on the porch watching the stars, bundled against the cold. "What do you want from this year?" Quinn asked. Grace was quiet for a moment, then said, "I want to stop being afraid. I want to build something that lasts. I want a family." She looked at him. "Is that too much to want?" "It is not too much," Quinn said, pulling her close. "It is everything, and we will make it happen." But the peace could not last forever. In late January, Doc Morrison rode out to the ranch, his face grim. "I came to warn you," he said, accepting Grace's offer of coffee. "Davies is planning something. He was in the saloon last night drinking with some men I did not recognize. Hired guns, if I am any judge. And your name came up, Quinn, yours and Grace's. Did you hear what they were planning?" Quinn asked, his stomach tightening. Not specifics, but the tone was threatening. "Davies is angry that he has not been able to run you off. He is taking your resistance personally." Doc Morrison looked at Grace. "And he is still pushing the witch narrative, trying to turn people against you. Though I will say, after what happened in December, he is having a harder time convincing folks." "We should go to the territorial marshal," Grace said. "Present everything we have documented." "That is a 4-day ride to Santa Fe," Quinn said, "and it leaves the ranch vulnerable. Davies might use our absence to burn the place down or steal the cattle." They discussed options late into the night, weighing risks and strategies. Finally, they decided that Quinn would make the trip to Santa Fe with all their documentation, while Grace stayed behind with Doc Morrison and a few trusted ranchers who agreed to help watch the property. It was not a perfect plan, but it was the best they had. Quinn left at dawn, his saddlebags full of letters and affidavits and evidence of Davies's corruption. Grace kissed him goodbye, holding him tight for a long moment. "Come back to me," she said. "Always," Quinn promised. "You are the reason I have to come back." The ride to Santa Fe was cold and nerve-wracking. Quinn kept watching his back trail, expecting ambush, but no one followed. He made good time, reaching the territorial capital in 3 days instead of 4. The territorial marshal, a weathered man named Carson, listened to Quinn's story with growing interest. "We have had reports about Davies," Carson said when Quinn finished. "But without solid evidence, it is hard to move against a sitting marshal. What you have brought me, these affidavits from multiple citizens, this documentation of illegal seizures and extortion, this is exactly what we need." "How long before you can act?" Quinn asked. "I can have deputies in Raton within 5 days," Carson said. "We will investigate, and if your claims are verified, we will arrest Davies and anyone working with him. The railroad's land grab will be reviewed, and any illegal seizures will be reversed." It was more than Quinn had dared hope for. He thanked Carson profusely and immediately began the ride back, pushing hard. He had been gone 4 days, and every hour away from Grace felt like an eternity. He arrived at the ranch on the evening of the 5th day and knew immediately that something was wrong. The house was dark, no lamp light in the windows, and an eerie silence hung over everything. Quinn's heart hammered as he dismounted and approached cautiously, his hand on his pistol. "Grace," he called. No answer. He lit a lamp with shaking hands and searched the house. Empty. The barn was empty too, the horses gone. Fighting panic, Quinn forced himself to think. Where would Grace go? Where would she be taken? He found the answer on the kitchen table, a note in crude handwriting. The witch is in town. Come alone if you want to see her alive. Davies. Quinn's blood ran cold. This was a trap, obviously, but that did not matter. Grace was in danger, and he would walk into hell itself if that was what it took to get her back. He checked his weapons, grabbed extra ammunition, and rode for Raton, the darkness swallowing him. He reached town near midnight. The main street was empty, but lights burned in the saloon, and he could hear voices inside, rough laughter and the sound of breaking glass. Quinn tied his horse behind the building and approached on foot, every sense alert. The saloon had a back entrance, and Quinn eased it open, slipping into the storeroom. He could hear Davies now, his voice loud with drink and triumph. "Told you we would get them both," Davies was saying. "The witch and her fool husband, he will come for her." That is the problem with these righteous types. They are predictable. "What are you going to do with her?" Another voice asked, younger, uncertain. "We are going to give the town a lesson in what happens to people who challenge authority," Davies said. "An old-fashioned trial for witchcraft. We will get confessions, by force if necessary, and then we will hang her in the morning. Make an example. After that, Tate will sell us his ranch for pennies, or he will have an accident. Either way, this problem goes away." Rage filled Quinn, cold and clarifying. He moved to the door between the storeroom and the main saloon, peering through a crack. He could see Grace tied to a chair in the center of the room, her face bruised but her eyes defiant. Davies stood over her with 3 other men, deputies or hired guns, all armed. Quinn counted 6 men total, including Davies. Bad odds, but he had surprise on his side. He also noticed something else. Several townspeople had been forced to witness this spectacle, standing against the walls with frightened faces. Mrs. Henderson was there, and Alina Watts, and a dozen others. Davies was trying to intimidate the entire town through Grace. Quinn made a decision. He holstered his pistol, picked up a bottle from the storeroom, and walked into the saloon with a calm he did not feel. "Evening, Marshal," Quinn said conversationally, as if he had just stopped by for a drink. "I got your note. Rather hospitable of you to invite me to this gathering." Davies spun, his hand going to his gun, but Quinn held up his empty hands. "I am not here to fight. I am here to talk." "Nothing to talk about, Tate," Davies snarled. "Your witch wife is going on trial for her crimes, and you are going to join her." "What crimes, specifically?" Quinn asked, still in that same calm tone. He was aware of the townspeople watching, listening. This was as much for them as for Davies. "I have been to Santa Fe, Marshal. I met with Territorial Marshal Carson. I gave him sworn affidavits from 24 citizens documenting your corruption, your illegal land seizures, your extortion. He is sending federal deputies. They will be here in 2 days. The statement hit like a thunderclap. Davies's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "You are lying." "Am I?" Quinn pulled papers from his coat, Carson's official seal visible even from a distance. "These are copies of the complaints filed against you. Marshal Carson found them very interesting. He is particularly interested in your relationship with the railroad, and how you have been using your position to drive people off their land." Several of the townspeople straightened, hope flashing across their faces. Davies looked around, seeing his controls slipping, and his hand tightened on his gun. "It does not matter," Davies said. "You will not live to see any federal deputies. If you shoot me in front of all these witnesses, you will hang," Quinn said flatly. "If you shoot Grace, same thing. Your game is over, Davies. The question is whether you walk away from this or get carried away." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Then one of the hired guns cleared his throat. "I did not sign on for killing witnesses and fighting federal marshals," he said. "I am out." He set down his gun and walked toward the door. One of the deputies followed, then another. Suddenly, it was just Davies and one loyal deputy against a room full of people who hated them. The marshal looked around, wild-eyed, and made the worst decision possible. He drew his gun. Three things happened almost simultaneously. Quinn dove for cover, drawing his own weapon. Several townspeople rushed Davies, led by Alina Watts of all people, the older woman swinging her heavy purse like a weapon. And Grace, who had been working on her bonds throughout the confrontation, broke free and kicked her chair at Davies's legs. The marshal went down under the weight of angry citizens, and his deputy surrendered immediately, hands high. It was over in seconds, anticlimactic after so much buildup. Quinn rushed to Grace, untying the remaining ropes and pulling her into his arms. She was trembling but whole, her bruises minor considering what could have happened. "I knew you would come," Grace said against his chest. "I told him you would come and he would regret it." "I will always come for you," Quinn said fiercely. "Always." Doc Morrison, who had apparently been among the forced witnesses, took charge. "Let us lock these two in the town jail until the federal deputies arrive. I think we are all done with corrupt marshals." The town rallied then, people Quinn barely knew stepping forward to help, to offer support, to apologize for not standing up sooner. Grace was crying, overwhelmed by the outpouring of acceptance she had never expected. Alina Watts approached them, her expression gentle. "I should have spoken up 5 years ago, should have fought harder for you then. I am sorry, Grace. You deserved better from us." "You spoke up today," Grace said, her voice choked. "That is what matters." They spent the night in Doc Morrison's office, Grace getting her bruises treated while Quinn gave detailed statements to the town council about everything that had happened. The federal deputies arrived 3 days later, as promised, and took Davies and his remaining supporter into custody. The investigation that followed was thorough and damning. Davies had been taking bribes from the railroad for 2 years, systematically targeting anyone who refused to sell their land. More than a dozen illegal seizures were documented and reversed, including the tripling of Doc Morrison's rent. Through it all, Quinn and Grace stood together, testifying when needed, supporting the other victims of Davies's corruption. And gradually, the town's attitude toward Grace shifted entirely. People who had once crossed the street to avoid her now greeted her warmly. Children who had been taught to fear her approached shyly, curious about the woman who had stood up to the bad marshal. One afternoon in early spring, Quinn and Grace stood on their repaired porch, watching the greening landscape. Grace's hand rested on her stomach where new life was growing, a child conceived in love and hope. "Are you happy?" Quinn asked, though he could see the answer in her smile. "I am home," Grace said simply. "I did not think I would ever have a home again, but this is home. You are home." Quinn kissed her, tasting salt and sweetness, future and promise. "We did it. We survived and we built something good." "We did," Grace agreed. "Together." The summer of 1879 brought changes beyond what Quinn and Grace could have imagined. With Davies gone and the railroad's illegal practices exposed, the territory sent a new marshal, a fair man named Douglas who treated everyone with equal respect. The town of Raton slowly healed, finding its footing as a community rather than a collection of frightened individuals. Quinn and Grace's ranch prospered. With 2 people working it, and the harassment ended, they expanded their herd and improved their infrastructure. Other ranchers reached out for advice, and Grace's knowledge of herbs and natural remedies made her the go-to person for medical issues when Doc Morrison was unavailable. She was becoming a pillar of the community, the exact opposite of the outcast she had been. Their son was born in late September, delivered by Doc Morrison with Eleanor Watts assisting. They named him Thomas, after Quinn's father, and he had his mother's dark eyes and his father's stubborn chin. Grace wept the first time she held him, overwhelmed by love and the realization that she was finally, truly safe. "He will never have to run," she whispered to Quinn as they gazed at their sleeping infant. "He will grow up knowing he belongs. He will grow up knowing his mother is the strongest woman in the territory," Quinn corrected with a smile. "And that is quite a legacy." As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, Quinn and Grace continued building their life. They added onto the house, creating more space for their growing family. Grace started a small school on their property, teaching children from neighboring ranches basic reading and mathematics, finally pursuing the dream she had abandoned years ago. Quinn served on the town council, using his voice to advocate for fair treatment and due process. They made friends, real friends, people who valued them for who they were rather than fearing them for rumors and lies. The Hendersons became regular dinner guests. Eleanor Watts became like a grandmother to Thomas, doting on him shamelessly. Doc Morrison was a fixture at their Sunday dinners, sharing medical knowledge with Grace and political gossip with Quinn. But it was the quiet moments Quinn treasured most. Grace reading on the porch while Thomas played with wooden horses Quinn had carved. The three of them riding out to check on the cattle, Thomas secure in front of his mother's saddle. Nights after Thomas was asleep, when Quinn and Grace would sit by the fire and talk about their day, their dreams, their gratitude for second chances. On their third anniversary, Quinn gave Grace a leather-bound book. When she opened it, she found it was the journal she had given him, now filled with his handwriting documenting their life together. The last entry read, "Today I told my wife for the 1,000th time that I love her. It will never be enough times. She is my salvation, my joy, my home. If I could go back and tell my lonely self from 3 years ago what the future held, I would say this: hold on. The best is coming." Grace looked up, tears streaming down her face. "Quinn, this is beautiful." "It is the truth," Quinn said simply. "Every word." She kissed him, soft and sweet and full of promise. "I love you. I will love you until the mountains crumble and the rivers run dry." "That is quite a commitment," Quinn teased gently. "You deserve quite a commitment," Grace said seriously. "You saved my life, not just from Davies but from loneliness and fear. You gave me back myself." "We saved each other," Quinn corrected. "That is how it works." The years continued to unfold with the usual mixture of joy and challenge that defines any life. A second child came, a daughter they named Margaret after Grace's mother, fierce and curious from birth. Then a third, another son named James, who was quiet and thoughtful like his father. The ranch grew with the family, requiring more help, so they hired 2 young men from town who needed steady work and a chance. Grace's school expanded until they had to build a dedicated schoolhouse on the property, funded partly by the territory's new education initiative, and partly by contributions from families who wanted their children educated. Grace proved to be an excellent teacher, patient but firm, and her students thrived. Quinn became something of a local leader, his experience with Davies making him a trusted voice on issues of justice and fair governance. He helped establish a proper legal system in the county, with regularly scheduled court sessions and lawyers to represent those who could not afford representation. The railroad still operated in the territory, but under much stricter oversight, and with fair compensation for land purchases. The years were not without sorrow. Doc Morrison passed away in 1885, and both Quinn and Grace grieved the loss of their friend and mentor. Eleanor Watts followed 2 years later, content in her final days to have made peace with past regrets. But these losses were balanced by joys: weddings of friends, births of neighbors' children, successful harvests and mild winters. On a crisp October day in 1890, Quinn and Grace celebrated their 12th anniversary. Thomas was 11 now, already showing signs of the man he would become, tall and serious but with his mother's kind heart. Margaret was 9, full of fire and questions, determined to be the first woman rancher in New Mexico. James was 7, a gentle soul who loved books and animals in equal measure. They had a party, the whole community invited, and the ranch rang with laughter and music. Quinn played his harmonica, still badly but with enthusiasm, and Grace danced with each of their children. As the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Grace found Quinn standing apart, watching the celebration with a small smile. "What are you thinking?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. "I am thinking about the day we met," Quinn said. "About how I was bleeding in the dirt, alone and angry and convinced my life was over. About how you appeared like an answer to a prayer I did not know how to pray." "I was running," Grace said softly. "Always running, always afraid, and you gave me a reason to stop." "We were both lost," Quinn said, "and we found each other. That is the miracle, Grace. Not the happy ending, though I am grateful for that, but the finding, the recognition that we belong together." Grace leaned her head on his shoulder, comfortable in his presence after all these years. "Do you remember being scared, being unsure if we were doing the right thing?" "Every day for the first 6 months," Quinn admitted with a laugh. "I kept waiting for you to realize you had made a terrible mistake and leave." "I kept waiting for you to see me the way the town saw me," Grace confessed. "As something wrong, something dangerous, but you never did, you only saw me." "I saw you," Quinn confirmed, turning to face her fully. "I see you. I will always see you, Grace. Not the rumors, not the fears, just you. The woman who saved my life in every way that matters." They kissed, surrounded by friends and family and the evidence of the life they had built together. When they broke apart, Margaret was watching them with the frank curiosity of a 9-year-old. "Are you going to be mushy all night?" she asked, wrinkling her nose. "Uncle Frank brought his fiddle, and he says he will teach me to play if you say yes." "Go learn the fiddle," Grace said, laughing. "Your father and I are entitled to be mushy on our anniversary." Margaret ran off, already shouting for Frank, and Thomas approached with a more measured pace. "Papa, some of the men are asking about expanding the water rights agreement. Mr. Peterson thinks we should bring it up at the next council meeting." At 11, Thomas was already thinking like a rancher and community leader. Quinn felt a swell of pride. "Tell them I will put it on the agenda. And Thomas, take tonight off from worrying about business. You are allowed to just be a kid sometimes." Thomas nodded solemnly, which was as close to agreement as he got, and wandered off to find his younger brother. Grace watched him go with a mixture of amusement and concern. "He is too serious sometimes," she said. "I worry he feels too much responsibility too young." "He is our son," Quinn said with a wry smile. "We were both too serious too young. He will be fine. He has us and his siblings and a community that supports him. That is more than either of us had." The party continued late into the night, and when everyone finally left, the family settled on the porch, tired and content. James had fallen asleep against Grace's side, and Margaret was fighting to keep her eyes open. Thomas sat beside Quinn, watching the stars emerge. "Papa," Thomas said quietly, "is it true that Mama was called a witch? That people wanted to hurt her?" Quinn glanced at Grace, who nodded slightly. Their children knew parts of the story, but perhaps it was time for more truth. "Yes," Quinn said honestly. Your mother was brave enough to stop her father from killing her grandmother, and some people could not understand that kind of courage. They made up stories to explain something that frightened them. But your mother never let those stories define her. She survived, and she built a good life, and she helped change this whole town for the better. Were you scared? Thomas asked. When you married her, I was terrified, Quinn admitted. Not of your mother, but of failing her, of not being enough. But we decided to be scared together, and that made all the difference. Thomas absorbed this, then said, I am going to be brave like Mama when I grow up. You already are, Grace said, rousing enough to ruffle his hair. All of you are. Now let us get you to bed before you fall asleep out here. They herded their sleepy children inside, tucked them in, and returned to the porch. The night was clear and cool, perfect for sitting together in comfortable silence. 12 years, Grace said eventually. Sometimes it feels like forever, and sometimes it feels like we just met. Both, Quinn agreed. That is the nature of good years, I think. They are full enough to feel eternal but precious enough to pass quickly. What do you want for the next 12 years? Grace asked. Quinn thought about it. More of this. More mornings waking up beside you. More watching our children grow. More building something good. I am not a man who needs excitement, Grace. I just need you and our family and this life we have made. That is what I want too, Grace said. Though maybe a few less emergency calvings in the middle of the night. I am getting too old for that, Quinn laughed. You are 35, not ancient. Feels ancient some mornings, Grace said, but she was smiling. I am happy, Quinn. Truly, deeply happy in a way I never thought possible. That still surprises me sometimes. Surprises me too, Quinn admitted. But I will take every surprise, every day, every moment with you. They sat together until the moon rose high. Two people who had found each other in desperation and built something beautiful through determination and love. The ranch slept around them, solid and real, a testament to what courage could build. The following years brought the inevitable changes that time carries. Thomas grew into a fine young man, taking over more of the ranch responsibilities and showing a talent for both leadership and compassion. At 18, he met a girl from Albuquerque, a teacher like his mother, and their courtship was sweet and steady. They married in 1897, and Grace wept through the entire ceremony, overwhelmed by joy and the passage of time. Margaret proved to be every bit as determined as she had promised. She learned ranching alongside her brother, refusing to be limited by gender expectations. When she was 20, she scandalized some of the old-timers by wearing trousers and competing in the local rodeo, where she won the barrel racing competition. She never did marry, choosing instead to expand into horse breeding, a business that made her quite successful and independent. James surprised everyone by developing an interest in law. He studied with the circuit judge who came through regularly, absorbing everything about justice and legal systems. Eventually, he went to school in Santa Fe, returning with a law degree and a passion for defending those who could not defend themselves. He set up practice in Raton, becoming the advocate Quinn and Grace had desperately needed years before. Quinn and Grace grew older together, their hair graying, their bodies showing the wear of years of hard work. But their love only deepened, weathering the challenges that would have broken a weaker bond. They lost a fourth pregnancy, a daughter who came too early and lived only hours. The grief was profound, but they held each other through it, and eventually the sharp pain dulled to a bittersweet ache. On their 20th anniversary in 1898, their children threw them a surprise party. The ranch, now considerably larger with additional buildings and expanded pastures, was decorated with flowers and ribbons. Friends and neighbors came from miles around, celebrating not just a marriage but a partnership that had transformed a community. The territorial governor even sent a letter of commendation, recognizing Quinn's years of public service and Grace's contributions to education. It was read aloud to applause, and Grace blushed, still uncomfortable with public recognition after all these years. That evening, as the celebration wound down, Quinn took Grace's hand and led her away from the crowd, to the spot where they had first truly talked all those years ago. The porch had been rebuilt and expanded, but the view was the same. Mountains in the distance, land rolling toward them, sky enormous overhead. 20 years, Quinn said, echoing their conversation from years before. We have been married for 20 years, Grace. Half my life now. The better half. The only good half, Grace corrected with a smile. Everything before you was just surviving. This has been living. I have been thinking about what you asked me on our 12th anniversary, Quinn said. About what I wanted for the next years. I gave you a safe answer then. But now I want to give you the true answer. Grace looked at him, curious. What is the true answer? I want to grow old with you, Quinn said simply. I want to see our grandchildren grow up. I want to sit on this porch when we are 80 and remember everything we have been through together. I want to take my last breath knowing I spent my life loving you. That is what I want, Grace. Nothing more, nothing less. Just a lifetime with you. Grace's eyes filled with tears, the good kind that come from being deeply moved. That is what I want too. Every day with you is a gift I never thought I would receive. I love you, Quinn Tate. I have loved you from the moment you offered me safety without demands. I will love you until my last breath and beyond. They kissed, soft and lingering, 20 years of intimacy and knowledge in that simple contact. Behind them, their children watched with smiles, understanding on some level that they were witnessing something profound. A love that had started in desperation and survived to become unshakable. The party continued, laughter and music filling the night, but Quinn and Grace stayed on the porch, content in each other's presence. They had faced down corrupt marshals and town prejudice, overcome their own fears and scars, built a family and a legacy. And through it all, they had held fast to each other. As the new century approached, bringing changes neither could predict, Quinn and Grace faced the future the same way they had faced everything. Together. Their story, which had begun with a lonely rancher's desperate proposal and an outcast woman's hesitant acceptance, had become a testament to the transformative power of love, courage, and choosing to stand with someone through every storm. The town of Raton, New Mexico, which had once feared Grace Ashford, now celebrated her as one of their most valued citizens. The woman called a witch had become a beloved teacher, a devoted mother, a pillar of the community. And the lonely rancher who had married her for survival had found something far more valuable: a partner, a love, a home in another person's heart. Their grandchildren would eventually number 7, children of Thomas and Margaret's chosen families, bright-eyed kids who climbed on Grandpa Quinn's knee for stories and begged Grandma Grace to teach them her herb lore and riding skills. The ranch continued to prosper, becoming one of the most successful in the territory, but more importantly, it remained a place of warmth and welcome, where everyone knew they would find acceptance and help. Quinn lived to see New Mexico become a state in 1912, casting his vote in the first election with pride. He served on various civic committees until his 80s, always advocating for fairness and justice. Grace's school produced generations of educated children who went on to become doctors, lawyers, teachers, and ranchers, each one carrying forward her legacy of perseverance and compassion. On a warm spring day in 1915, Quinn and Grace celebrated their 37th anniversary quietly, just the two of them on their porch. They were in their 70s now, bodies worn but spirits strong. Their children had offered to arrange a party, but Quinn and Grace had declined, preferring the simple pleasure of each other's company. "You have any regrets?" Grace asked, her hand clasped in Quinn's as they watched the sunset. Quinn considered the question carefully, giving it the weight it deserved. "I regret that we did not have more time. However long we get will never be enough. But regret about choosing you, about building this life, not for one single moment." "Good answer," Grace said with a smile. "Because I would have been very cross if you said otherwise after all these years." Quinn laughed, the sound rich and full despite his age. "Would you? What would you have done?" "Probably nothing," Grace admitted. "I am too old for dramatic gestures. But I would have thought stern thoughts in your direction." "Terrifying," Quinn said with mock seriousness. "I live in constant fear of your stern thoughts." They sat in companionable silence, watching the colors shift across the sky. Finally, Grace spoke again, her voice soft but clear. "I was so angry when I was young. Angry at my father, angry at the town, angry at a world that seemed determined to hurt me. That anger kept me alive in the mountains, but it was eating me from the inside. You gave me something to replace the anger. You gave me love and purpose and peace. That is worth more than I can ever express." "You did the same for me," Quinn said. "I was lost, Grace. After my parents died, I was just going through motions, waiting for the inevitable moment when I would lose everything. You gave me a reason to fight. You made me believe the world could still be good." "We saved each other," Grace said, repeating what had become their shared truth. "That is the story, is it not? Two broken people who found each other and made something whole." "That is exactly the story," Quinn agreed. "And I am grateful for every chapter." As darkness fell, they went inside together, moving with the careful synchronization of long partnership. They prepared for bed, helped each other with buttons that had become difficult for arthritic fingers, and settled under quilts Grace's mother had made decades ago. "Good night, my love," Quinn whispered, as he had every night for 37 years. "Good night," Grace whispered back. "Thank you for choosing me." "Thank you for letting me," Quinn replied. They fell asleep holding hands, two people who had found their home in each other, who had built a legacy not of wealth or power but of love and perseverance. Their story, which had started with a bullet and a desperate proposal, had become something beautiful, a testament to the truth that sometimes the best things in life come from the moments when we are brave enough to offer and accept help. Quinn Tate lived to be 81, passing peacefully in his sleep in the winter of 1919, with Grace beside him. She held his hand as he took his last breath, whispering words of love that he carried with him into whatever came next. Grace followed him exactly 3 months later, as if she had been waiting just long enough to ensure their affairs were in order, and their family would be all right without them. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking their ranch, under a tree they had planted on their first anniversary. The headstone, paid for by their children and grandchildren, reads simply, "Quinn and Grace Tate. They chose love, they chose each other, they chose well." The ranch continued under Thomas's capable management, and eventually his children took it over, maintaining the traditions their grandparents had established. Grace's school became a permanent institution, later renamed the Ashford Tate Academy in honor of its founder. James's law practice grew to include his own children, creating a legacy of justice and advocacy that spanned generations. And in Raton, New Mexico, when people told stories of the old days, they always included the tale of Quinn and Grace. Not the ugly rumors that had once circulated, but the true story. Of a lonely rancher who took a chance, of an outcast woman who found courage, of two people who built something beautiful from desperation and hope. It became a story parents told their children, a reminder that love could conquer fear, that kindness could transform lives, that choosing to stand with someone through their darkest moments was the truest form of heroism. The Wild West that Quinn and Grace had known faded into history, replaced by modern roads and automobiles, and all the comforts of the 20th century. But the values they had lived by endured: courage, compassion, standing up for what was right even when it was difficult, and most of all, the transformative power of love freely given and gratefully received. Their story ended as all stories must, but it ended well, with love triumphant, with family thriving, with a community transformed. Quinn had been lonely, Grace had been outcast, but together they had been invincible. That was their legacy, their gift to those who came after. Proof that sometimes, in the most desperate moments when we reach out to help another struggling soul, we save ourselves in the process. And on quiet evenings when the wind blows just right across the New Mexico landscape, locals swear you can still feel their presence on that ranch. Two spirits who loved each other so completely that not even death could fully separate them, watching over the land and the legacy they built together. Content in the knowledge that they had lived well, loved deeply, and left the world better than they found it.